and welcome to our Gold participants for around the world. I'm Fiona Lang-Sharp, IBCLC Public Relations Manager and MC for Gold Lactation Online Conference 2016. Well, I have the pleasure once again sitting down with Cynthia Mojab, and she's going to be talking to the rug pulled out from underneath me, depression during pregnancy and after birth. Such a great topic, Cynthia. And the greatness, well, from this is the fact that this is a topic that, without a doubt, needs to be addressed on a regular basis. This is not just a one sort of shot. You can't just learn it all right now, right here. This is something that has an ongoing, questions surrounding it, and definitely needs to be an ongoing learning experience. And I know that you're very passionate about this. I know it is your life, that this is what you do. But why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself once again to our listening audience and tell us a little bit about, well, I know you and I were talking off air just a few minutes ago, but I want you just to answer just a little bit about this topic and how breastfeeding and postpartum, what's the things that you've learned most recently about how they interact?
Well, first, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very glad that Gold recognizes the importance of mental health in the context of lactation. Regarding myself, I'm a dual professional. I wear two hats. One is that I'm a mental health care provider, and one is that I'm an IBCLC. So it has been very natural for me to be interested in the overlap of these two fields, which is one of the reasons that I'm interested in that interaction between breastfeeding
Mhm.
and postpartum depression. And I think one of the, as we were talking off air, that you know this is actually not a simple question. There's really a great deal of complexity in the research. We are actively learning more about the interaction between breastfeeding and postpartum depression. The thing that came to my mind, a fact that we now know that I would like to be more widely known, I think is very important, is related to a study that was published in 2014 by Bora and colleagues. And in that study, they were looking at part of what they looked at was that the intention about infant feeding is important in understanding what's happening with mental health. So one of their findings was that wanting to breastfeed and not being able to breastfeed more than doubles the risk of postpartum depression.
Mm.
And this is a very important finding because one of the very common patterns that I see as a clinician is that it's very hard to find breastfeeding compatible treatment for postpartum depression. A very frequent result of seeking that care is someone telling you that you need to stop breastfeeding. Maybe they're telling you that the medication's not compatible. Maybe they're telling you that, oh, you need to sleep more, and that may be true, but they think that to make that happen, breastfeeding has to stop. And they're not considering that there's no knowledge out in the real world. This doesn't seem to have been disseminated well in the real world. That you have to know what that parent wanted. And if that was something that, was fine with them, they never really were interested in breastfeeding, then if, they follow that recommendation, which of course increases the risk of a variety of health issues for both the parent and the child, but it wouldn't necessarily increase their risk of postpartum depression. But if they really wanted to breastfeed, then not only would they have the physical risk consequences of stopping breastfeeding for themselves and for their baby, but they would also have a substantially increased risk of postpartum depression. So if they're already coping with mood challenges and they didn't
Right.
want to stop breastfeeding and they follow that recommendation, they could move from struggling to out and out official diagnosis of postpartum depression and or make their depression substantially worse. So we have to understand intention, and that stopping breastfeeding is not one of those default, magic wand fix things about, for improving postpartum mood challenges. It's way more complicated than that.
Well, All I can say is, wow. I mean, I'm listening to you. I know that when we were talking off air, you said, like, this is not an easy, simple question to answer, especially for yourself, who is deeply immersed in this subject matter. But I really appreciate this is something to me that seems like you suggested it jumps out at you. It speaks volumes to how we're, treating mothers, how we're listening as IBCLCs, lactation consultants, and what the intent was originally of that mother, because this is going to impact her, and of course her physical and mental health well-being substantially on her mothering journey. So such an important and value that gave me great value. So you've just made me hungry for more. That's all that happened right there. I was just like, wow, I'm like, okay, I got to go find this. Where is it? So I'm sure you'll let us know. We can post that on the forums too if
Yeah,
it's
it's
not in your
definitely it's in the
bibliography. Yeah,
bibliography, and I cite it
that's
in the
fantastic.
presentation. So it's
Yeah, oh, you're
yep.
lovely. Thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. I know for you, you live and breathe this, but for those of us that don't, we need this. We need to be fed this information. And I am very passionate. I have so many clients. I actually have a client who is, she's actually laboring today, and she suffered deeply with breastfeeding and postpartum depression. And she was one of those mothers that ended up quitting. She doesn't want to do it this time. And this just adds value already to a client that I'm possibly going to see today or tomorrow. So thank you so much. So let's get on to something a little lighter here, because I want to talk about some of the values that we have been talking about here at Gold. And the value is that we have been going for 10 years, and we're very proud of that. I stand with my shoulders straight and tall, and I'm so fortunate to be part of this team here. Nina's also joining us here today, and in the background, she's working on some tech stuff. And we're very grateful, of course. Cynthia has become part of our family here at Gold, and it's just been wonderful to have her be so generous and gracious, always sharing her latest knowledge with us, and I appreciate that. A lot of our conversation has been chatting with our speakers about those 10 years of what has happened in the field of lactation, and some of the driving forces that have kept us going, some of the great changes that we have seen over the 10 years. And some of the things that we have yet to see that we're holding on to and we really want to see happen sooner rather than later. But in reflection of that, Cynthia, would you share possibly a little bit of some of your personal, maybe professional changes that you've also seen as you have worked in this industry for some time as well?
Yeah, the such a great question, and it'd be great to be in a room with a bunch of people and ask the same question and get the
Hmm.
answers from different perspectives. I think some of the things that have, I've personally changed in, being increasingly aware of kind of parallels with some of the bigger patterns in the field itself. I've long been interested in, the context that influences infant feeding decisions. And I think the field itself is increasingly appreciating, we see more research, we see more organizations addressing these kinds of issues, anything related to what is influencing infant feeding decisions, whether it's mental health, like in this presentation, or whether it's social context, systems of oppression, who has access to the field, who can get and become an IBCLC, and how does the fact that we don't have equitable access to the profession harm families who need more providers that look like them and understand their experience in a way that someone outside of that social group cannot. So I think there's kind of a parallel between some of the things that I'm interested in learning about, and an increasing awareness in the field in general about the importance of that social context. So much about infant feeding happens, in your head. I tend to say it's breastfeeding is rather like sex. It's not just about physiology. There's a lot
Mm.
going on in your mind, in your heart, that influences the experience, and context internally and externally is everything.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned there's a couple of things that I want to pull out of what you just mentioned there, and that was something you said about equity, and that is something that we haven't, as I've been talking to speakers, it's not something that has come up yet, but I definitely feel that that has now made it onto the map, that there is now a very, it seems like it's slow, but it's getting there. There is discussions happening now, though, about equity within our field, and that's extremely important. I'm glad that that is something that we can continue to see and address as we move forward. And still, someone said yesterday, we're still a fairly young field as lactation consultants, but nonetheless, we want to see it, fully fledged with diversity and, all walks of life being part of our teams as well. And, moving forward too with, just the differences that we've seen, the information that's out there for our families today and of our lactation consultants, it's really exciting that we can continue to all really work together as this field grows as well. So lastly, Cynthia, I would love it if you would share a little bit about what our delegates have looked forward to when you're sharing on this particular topic for us.
Sure. I actually have two presentations, as you know, with gold during this next conference here. The earlier one is kind of the nuts and bolts of screening, and this one is very much into why that screening is so important. And I think what I've seen when I've interacted with learners at conferences is that oftentimes people don't quite realize why this is so important, the ethical mandate, the reasons behind increasing calls for screening for perinatal mental health issues. And if you're not, fully motivated to take on a learning curve, we're all so busy, and it can be really kind of overwhelming to figure out how do I want to do this learning curve. So I think understanding the ethics behind that need to go ahead and undertake that is really very important. It helps motivate us to engage in that necessary work and endure our discomfort as we start some new thing that we haven't done before. We're not sure about how it's going to work, and how am I going to communicate this with my clients. So I think motivation is a really important part of taking on some new logistical challenge.
Sure. Well, that's great. And what a great point. I was thinking about that whole learning curve and as we challenge ourselves, but really know what our motives are behind it, and how much time we have and what we can dedicate it to that area as well. Well, thank you, Cynthia. I really appreciate. I probably took up more of your time than I should have, but it's always a delight to hear what you have to say, and I learn it feels like every moment we're together and engaging, I feel like I'm always learning. So I think that's why I love asking you these questions and challenging you hopefully a little bit to answer what's out there and what's on the map. And lastly, I just wanted to say, Cynthia, you mentioned in your just chatting there about having a room full of people and asking all the differences or the things that they have seen change over the last 10 years. Well, I wanted to say to you and our listening audience, our room is on YouTube right now because I've asked everyone, and it's an absolute pleasure to hear all the nuances, the challenges, some of the same things that have been, parallels for a lot of people, and then some of the things that they're looking forward to. So if anyone's interested, please go to our YouTube channel, and you can, of course, you're listening to us now on there, but you can also listen to many of the other speakers that we have for our lactation conference this year. So thank you again, Cynthia. It's been a lovely having you today.
My pleasure.
And thanks to our listening audience, and thank you also to Nina for being with us here too in the background. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.